been getting short of breath more. That summer, he wasn't doing outdoor chores very well, and I think he had been to the doctor earlier that year, or I had complained to him that he should. One of the two happened. And then I was actually gone for a work trip because at that time I worked where I traveled occasionally. So I was gone for 2 or 3 days. And I called him, and he told me that he had coughed up blood and he was scared. And I said, well, I'm home tomorrow and we'll do what we got to do. And, is it a lot? No, it's just a little bit. And I said, well, I'm feverishly on the internet, even though I'm a nurse, and you think cancer right away. I'm like, okay, there's other reasons that you cough up blood. So I was looking that all up and trying to convince myself that it would be okay. And I got home, and I believe he probably called to make an appointment and not to get right in. And the next night, I had a book club I went to. And Dave was home alone, and he'd been outside in the yard, and he'd had a few drinks. And I came home, and he told me he'd fallen. And I'm like, why didn't you call me? And he's like, oh, I'm okay. And I'm kind of not feeling good. And I said, well, lay down. And I think I took his blood pressure, and it was a little low. And I said, lay down, put your feet up, drink water, drink a lot of water. And he lay there for a little bit, and he tried to get up, and he fell again. And I just said, we have to go to the emergency room. So he had fallen in the back, and then he tells me he'd fallen another time and not told me. So he had this idea something was wrong, but he, I don't know, was maybe hoping it would go away, something like that. So he went to the emergency room, and he said he fell and his side hurt, so they did a chest x-ray. And they came in and said, we need to do a CAT scan. And right away, when they said that, I knew something was wrong. And they did the CAT scan and found cancer. But we had to stay there and finish a bunch of tests because, of course, he was dizzy and he had fainted, so they had to rule out heart stuff. So in the meantime, they had found out there was other things wrong, and it was shock. Just felt like being in shock. And we got home at 4 in the morning and just laid in bed and held each other. And I was scared shitless because they gave us a picture and the tumor was so close to his aorta. So my fear for quite a few times was, that he'd bleed out or something. And I thought, how would I deal with that situation if it happened? And thank God it didn't, never did. It never did. So we sat on that, I think, for 3 days. 3 or 4 days. It seems like it was a Thursday or a Wednesday night that we were in ER, and I kind of, the beauty of my job then, and I was in a sales job, I kind of worked from home the next day and stayed with Dave, and the Saturday came, and Dave didn't want to call anybody, and we kind of just stayed at home, and finally Sunday I said, we have got to tell people because I can't do this anymore. And you have to tell people. And Dave's biggest fear was that that his friends would be hurt and sad. So we started calling, and I made the first call. I said, I'll do it, and I made the first 2 calls. And after about the 3rd call, Dave started. And he called people. And then a lot of people came over that afternoon. And I think that really started the whole idea of it wasn't just Dave and it wasn't just me. It was us. It was all of us. And what great friends we have.
I found out about Dave's lung cancer fairly early because I think Lee called the Yaya sisters early, and I think also being a nurse, there's a different type of support we could probably give, or I could probably give that maybe someone else couldn't yet. I think none of us were really surprised. He's a heavy smoker, and I know Lee at one time said to me, I thought this would happen. He was a heavy smoker, but I thought it would be later, not so young in his life. So, but she included people. They both included people pretty early, invited us in as they went through that journey. So,
David, I heard when I found out that David was ill, he called me on his, I guess he was at home. He called me and told me himself. And it was tough because we both started crying over the phone, you know, and my dad passed away about 16, 15 years ago. So he was asking me, you know, how, when he was diagnosed, what it was, and so we chatted about that. But he called me. I think he called everybody. He wanted to tell everybody personally that, you know, he had this disease and he was going to fight it, and so we fought it with him.
I think that weekend or the beginning of the next week when we found out that Dave had cancer, you know, you don't know. No one's going to tell you. No one said you have 2 weeks. You don't know. So Dave and I were talking, and I said, you know, Dave, here's what we have. We need to make a couple goals, and that's what we do. That's what we concentrate on. We absolutely have to concentrate on, if you want to fight, we're fighting, but what do you want from your life, and what do I want from our life? That's what we have to have, because we don't know how much time there is. So Dave said his goal was to play music, and I said my goal was to be with him. So that just, to me, sort of meant what was important and what we were going to do. So for me to spend time with him meant that it was going to be good quality time. It was going to be the memories forever. So I had to keep going. And it's not that I didn't cry. It's not that there weren't hard times. But we just went from one project to the next. It drove Dave crazy for 26 years that I don't sit still. He always complained to me about that. And I tried very hard for the last year and a half to sit still with him more. But I guess that's just my personality. There was a task in front of me. I had to sit down and make the list of what I was going to do, and we went from one thing to the other. And Dave, what Dave wanted, Dave got. Pretty much what Dave wanted, he got. He said, I want to sit out front and it was cold. I went and bought a heater. Okay, get outside, you know. And so it was easy. It was easy. That was my goal.
I remember towards the end of his life, it must have been the last week or two, somewhere in there towards the end, and he was in a hospital bed in the living room, and I was sitting on the edge of the bed, and I was talking to him, and he was listening, and I guess between the drugs he was on and just the disease shutting down his body, he didn't say very much. So I just kept talking and talking, and finally he just looked up at me and he goes, I remember. And it was just like, you know, all of a sudden he woke up out of this kind of a trance. He looks up at me and he goes, I remember. And he goes, Edward. It was like that's how out of it he was. He just, you know, he realized that who I was sitting there talking with him, and I don't know what your mind goes through when you're that sick, but it was like a light clicked on, and yeah, that was really tough.
The last car ride. It was a beautiful, beautiful fall day, and it was chilly in the shade. So Lee had put Dave at the end of the driveway in the sun, and I thought, wow, it's really nice out here, but we were really bored. We were just sitting there staring at each other. I had Dave duty for the afternoon, and I had just gotten my brand new, for me, car, a 94 Toyota Camry. So I looked at Dave and I said, do you like my new car? It was right there. And he goes, yeah, I like it. I said, it's a stick shift. And he said, oh, that's good. And I said, do you want to go for a ride? And he said, yeah. So he's in a wheelchair, and I put him right against the passenger side. I'd open the door on the front. And so I'm like, okay, we're going to get in the car. And I got him under his arms, and I said, you got to push a little bit, Dave. And he's like, okay. And he stood up kind of, and I've got him, and I pivoted him, and he's not helping me. And Dave Mackey, you know, he was kind of a big guy. And so we fall into the front seat of the car, and I'm like laying on top of him, and I'm going, wow. And he says, wow. And I go, okay, let's figure this one out. And he's like, I can't move. I'm going, okay, I'm going to get you in this car. You really want to go for a car ride? And he's like, yeah. And so I go into the back seat of the car, and I'm hanging over the seat, and I'm trying to pull him in, and quite a few tugs and pulls, and then I go back around the car. I get a leg up in and the other, and then I shove him up so he's sitting, and he's like, okay, that's fine. Don't touch him anymore. And I'm like, oh, I'm really sorry, you know. I thought it'd be a lot easier than it was. And so then we just drove around. It was just a magnificent day of clear, clear, clear sky. The air was not humid or anything. It was fresh, and it was windy. And we drove all over, and we went through Wendy's Drive-In. We went by the old Mackey homestead. We drove around downtown St. Joe. I asked him, where do you want to go? And I think he truly, knew he was just getting a last look at his world. And we went down the beach. We went to Silver Beach, and there were all these guys on the little boards with the parachutes, and they're flying up in the air and flipping, and it was so windy. And he was just amazed by that. And the two of us were really amazed, and I kept saying, oh my goodness, look at that. And he's like, wow. And he made, the only comment he really made about, anything out of the ordinary, and he said, I'm going to be flying soon. And I said, yes, you are, and man, is it going to be fun. And then there was a man walking down the sidewalk with his family, and he was parked near us. And Dave said, oh, I think that is, and he said a name, like Tim Taylor. And I'm thinking, Tim the Tool Man, from the TV show? And I'm going, who? And he goes, this name's Tim. I know that guy. I go, really? And I go, are you sure? He's going, yeah. So I rolled down my window, and I go like, Tim! And then I look back real fast, and Dave's like, oh, that was really sharp. And I go, the guy didn't look. And so he came around his car a little bit, and I go, you want me to yell again? He goes, yeah. I go, Tim! And he looks at me, and I go, are you Tim? He goes, no. And I turned to Dave, I go, that's not Tim. And he goes, oh, I guess it's not. And his humor was just so funny. He really just had this subtle, dry humor that would just crack me up. And then from there, we drove around the golf course, and we drove in by the uh, where you would park to pick up your golf carts and everything. And Marcus Robinson was there, who is a great guitar player, singer, but he's also a big wig in the whole organization. Big, kind, nice African American man. And Dave, he like lifts his arm and he goes, "Marcus." And I said, "Oh yeah." So I drove up by him and rolled down the window, and I'm going, "Hey, Marcus." And he saw that it was Dave. And they had, you know, everyone knew Dave was sick, but he had not been out and about. And so when somebody saw them who hadn't seen him in a while, you see this profound change in a person. And Marcus just, he like looked at Dave and he's like, "Oh man, I've just, gosh, been thinking of you." And they had just a great conversation, hit a little bit on music and stuff. And then he said goodbye, and it was very poignant. And we drove away, and Dave just goes, "My man, Marcus." And so, and then we headed home, because I thought if Lee arrived home and we weren't there, she'd be really mad at me, really, really mad at me. And so we did go home. And I realized that he really appreciated it. He was very tired by the time we got home, and but he had a glow about him, that he was able to do something out of what his ordinary day had become, and which he didn't seem to mind. He was outside a lot, and this gave him a little opportunity. So that was my Dave drive-by as we drove by St. Joe. And it was nice, and it's a great memory for me.
You know, Dave worked at Zars for a long time, and he knew a lot of people from Zars. And one of his friends, Mike Holmes, did a lot of recording of bands through the years, and Dave talked with him. And he stepped over that last week, or the weekend, I think it was the weekend before Dave died. He saw us on the porch, and he drove by and came over and talked to Dave. And he hadn't seen Dave in a while, and I think he was a little maybe shocked at how weak he was. And he brought up the fact that he had video of the benefit, and of when Max and Struan played and Mr. Ed played, and he wanted to put it all together, and he thought it would be a great idea if we went outside and he'd put it on a screen and we could all sit around by the campfire and watch the movie. And Dave seemed to think it was a good idea, and I said yes, and if we're going to do that, let's set a date right now. And he said, "Okay, next Friday." I said, "You got it." So the week went on, and Dave just kind of got weaker. You know, Wednesday was a great day for him, and Thursday he was tired. I let him stay in bed, and he just kept getting weaker. And we had this, you know, the word was out Friday, video at our house, you know, beer, water, fire, whatever. A bunch of people were coming. But I knew I was putting on the blog that he was getting sicker, and I'm like, my sister-in-law's there Friday morning. I'm like, oh, should I cancel? I don't know. I don't know if I should cancel or not. Oh, I'm going to go ahead. And I thought we could at least get Dave. The plan changed from the backyard to the front yard because Dave was so weak, and I thought we could get him out to the patio, maybe to the deck. But he was pretty much bedbound by that day. And friends had come over all day, and as you may have heard earlier, my two friends cleaned my refrigerator and threw everything out for me, which was good. But we were being hovered by all our friends and family. That was wonderful. They were there taking care of us. And Friday came, and Dave was in bed, and he really wasn't talking to us anymore. But he was very calm and quiet, and we set the video up in the front, and people walked in the house and sat around the bed and talked to him. And and we had the movies going in the front, and it was just kind of people coming and going. And if they were afraid, I'd say, let's go talk to Dave. He can hear you. And when everyone left, we sat around. There were a few of us, five or so of us left. Buddy Zimmerman and Kay, and I think my sister-in-law Allison, and I can't remember the diehards at the end, but there were some diehards that were there really late into the morning, and we put on, I'm gonna forget the name of the band. We put on Earth, Wind and Fire album, and we all sang along to Earth, Wind and Fire, to Dave. And then Saturday night, I don't remember, but Sunday night, his last night, my friend Catherine was there, and Julie was coming. It was the change of the guard. And our friend Danny Dine came over, and he sang to Dave. It was beautiful, just gorgeous. I never wanted to tell Danny, but he was kind of the angel of death, because about an hour later, Dave died. This is good for me to tell.